The Boxcar Children, Book 9, Mountain Top Mystery. The Aldens climbed a mountain and find a mystery. The hike up Old Flat Top was only supposed to take a day, but a dangerous rock slide changes everything to reveal a hidden cave that just may hold a legendary treasure. Chapter 1. Grandfather in the Lead. It was a fine warm day in early summer. The Aldens, Henry, Jessie, Violet, and Benny, and their grandfather were just eating lunch. They had come to dessert of apple pie and cheese. Benny rested his head on his hand. After a while he said, "Grandfather, do you remember a few summers ago we wanted to go mountain climbing?"
"Why, yes, my boy."
"Well, do you remember we got cheated out of it? Joe and Alice had to go abroad, and we couldn't go alone." Henry said, "Benny will never forget that. We went to see Aunt Jane at Mystery Ranch instead." Benny said, "Well, I wondered where we were going to go that summer if we had gone. What mountain were we going to climb?"
"Benny, does this mean that you want to climb a mountain?" asked Mr. Alden. He couldn't help laugh.
"Yes, it does," said Benny. "Maybe not the same mountain."
"No, indeed, it wouldn't be," said Mr. Alden. "That year, we were going to go up to the Rockies. No more of that. We'll have to choose Old Flat Top, because I don't want Violet getting all tired out with a long climb, and I don't want me getting all tired out either. The rest of you are tough enough." Grandfather looked up to see that every Alden was looking at him. The 4 shining faces answered him. They were 4 nods. "You do have the strangest ideas, Benny," said Jessie. "What put that in your head?" "Well," said Benny, "I've been reading about that place in school." "About Old Flat Top?" asked Violet. "Oh, you have you?" said Henry. "You chose Flat Top yourself?" "Right," said Benny. "I don't want to climb too much myself. I get lame." Mr. Alden said, "Well, my answer is yes. Old Flat Top is easy enough for all of us, and yet it is interesting all the way up. And we'll all be able to get a good rest on the smooth top." "Just like airplanes landing on an airplane carrier," said Benny. "That's exactly right, my boy," said Grandfather. "Only this flat top is twice as big as a carrier." Benny finished his apple pie and put down his fork. "The only question is, when? Let's go right away." Everyone laughed. Benny and Grandfather were so much alike. When they wanted anything, they wanted it right away. "What do you mean, right away?" asked Grandfather, smiling. "You mean this minute?" "If you do, we could go this minute. It's very easy. It's only a day trip. You climb up Flat Top, eat lunch, and climb down. There is just time in one day. Nobody spends the night there." "How do you know all this, Grandfather?" asked Henry. "Oh, I had a friend who made the trip last summer. He said it was exactly right for his wife, and they had a fine time. Near the foot of the mountain is a general store. The men give you poles and a lunch and directions. They always leave a lot of firewood all cut for a campfire to cook your lunch on the top. This place isn't for real mountain climbers. It's for old men and children." Henry laughed. He knew it was a real mountain. Grandfather was having a good time teasing them. "Do you mean we can really go today?" asked Jessie. "Well, no," Grandfather answered. "I should say tomorrow would be better because we have to have a full day. We can drive to Old Flat Top in 2 hours." What time do you want to get up, Benny? You're the sleepy one.
I'll get up at 5, said Benny. I did when we went to the lighthouse.
So you did. 5 it is. Lay out some sports clothes. Better take some extra clothes. We may want to go on somewhere else. And another thing, we can't take Watch. He'll just get in the way. That's right, said Henry. He will do nothing but whine. He doesn't like to see us do anything dangerous. Mr. Alden looked thoughtful and then said, I believe that Dr. Pierce Osgood is working somewhere in the mountain range not too far from Old Flattop. How about it, Benny? Does that name mean anything to you? Benny shook his head, but Henry said, Osgood. It means something to me. He was the author of a geology book I read for college course last year. That's Old Flattop, said Benny, pointing. It was the lowest mountain in the range. Other peaks went much higher into the sky, and some looked blue in the distance, others looked violet, others looked green. But Old Flattop was so near it looked green almost all the way up. The top was solid rock. Hey, said Henry, there is the store. It seems to be made out of logs. He stopped the car at the door, and they all went into the store. Old Flattop towered right over them. Just right, said Benny. Not too high, not too steep, just right, for a good healthy climb and a grand view at the top. Then he thought, isn't it queer that this storeman seems to know Grandfather? The two men were shaking hands, and Grandfather just said, Fit us out for Flattop, won't you? The man said, You each need a pack on your back to carry your lunch. You'll need 5 poles. I should think that would be enough. You'll find the path is well marked, but there's only one. And remember that there is no other path down. I'd like to go first, said Benny. I'm sorry to disagree with you, Benny, said Mr. Alden. I should like to go first. Oh, said Benny. Of course, you should go first. That's okay. Thanks, said Mr. Alden. They went out. It was true that the path was well marked. The trees were marked with knotted strips of red cloth. It was a little hard in some places, but the poles were a great help. Each climber had a pack on his back. Up and up they went. Violet was right behind Grandfather. Benny still wished he could be the leader, but he thought he had better mind his grandfather at this point. It took the Aldens 3 hours to reach the first stop. See the sign? Said Henry. Lunch here. The man said we must eat just half our lunch right here. I have never been so hungry in my life, said Benny. Oh, yes, you have, choked Henry. Almost every meal you eat. And be careful how much water you drink. That's the thing we have to save. Soon they were ready to go on. When they were almost at the top, they noticed there were no more bushes, no more trees, no more grass. It was all gray rock. Grandfather looked ahead. He could see the last 2 steps very well. He noticed that the last step was a big one, and he was glad he had gone first. With his pole, he reached the very top where it was flat. He turned around and gave a hand to Violet. Then he helped Jessie up and reached way down to help Benny. With his pole, Henry climbed up by himself. They all looked around. This is as big as our own front yard, said Jessie. What a view, said Benny. The town is over there, and nothing but woods up here at the foot of the mountain. Henry said,
Here is the woodpile for campfires, and there's the fireplace. This is where we cook the rest of our lunch." It never entered anyone's head, even grandfather's, that a fire might be needed to keep them warm. Chapter 2. Hold on, Benny. "My, I'm glad we have sweaters," said Henry. "The wind blows harder up here." He pulled his brown sweater on over his head. The others put on their sweaters, and they sat down in a row. "What a view," said Jessie. They looked out over the valley. They felt as if they were very high up. Grandfather said, "Benny, you come over and sit by me. I want to talk to you. You know, a boy ought to learn a thing the first time he is told. Of course, he can learn it the second time and maybe the third time, but he will save a lot of time for himself by learning the first time. I am telling you not to go near the edge, and I shall say nothing more about it. Is that clear?" Grandfather almost never spoke in that sort of voice. "Oh, yes, indeed," cried Benny. "I learned that before you even got through talking. I don't like the edge myself." Henry looked around at Flat Top. There was a small hump in the middle. "Look at the wavy lines in the rocks," he said. "White and black and gray. Wouldn't a geologist find this interesting?" Everyone looked around. Violet said, "It looks like the waves of the sea." Grandfather said, "That is just what they look like, but they are waves of rock. What we are standing on now was covered by the ocean, or maybe even several thousands of years ago during the flood." Henry said, "This low mountain may have been near the ocean floor? It was pushed up to where it is now?" Benny threw his head back and laughed. He said, "I'll bet old dinosaurs paddled all around here." "Maybe dinosaurs were here when this was a swamp," said Jessie. "I wish I had brought my camera," said Henry. "I wish you had too," said Violet. Mr. Alden was looking at the great stretch of woods below. He said, "I don't think anyone has ever cut those trees. I'd hate to get lost there." Benny looked at his wristwatch. "I hope someone besides me will say it's time to eat," he said. Violet said, "I'm willing." She patted Benny's shoulder. Jessie said, "Let's sit here and plan what we will do." "That's the housekeeper in you, Jess," said Henry. "If we are going to cook the hamburger, we'll have to get a fire started. Let's find the wood." Mr. Alden sat still and watched them. "Well, there are certainly all kinds of wood," said Benny. "Big and little. And look, there is a kettle and a frying pan." "That kettle is for hot water, I think," said Violet. "Just throw a little coffee in it, and there will be Grandfather's coffee." "Freshly made," said Grandfather. "Those men at the store thought of everything," said Benny. "Here's the fireplace, with a back rock to keep the wind off." He was beyond the little hump. "Well, I guess we're all set," said Henry. Everybody had a job. The two boys built the fire, for even Benny knew how to start a good fire. The girls made cakes of the hamburger and took out the bacon. "I think we should fry the bacon first," said Jessie, and the girls soon had the crisp slices lying on a napkin. "Where shall we put the grease, Grandfather, when we get through?" "Give it to me," said Mr. Alden, "and I'll show you. Wait till I get it all set." Grandfather, without a smile, got down flat on his stomach and crawled slowly to the edge. "Now,
I'll take the pan, he said. Everyone tried not to laugh. Mr. Alden looked so funny. With a straight face, Mr. Alden took the pan and poured the hot fat down the rocky mountainside. He backed slowly until he was far from the edge. Then he said, "That grease went almost straight down for half a mile. That's why you can't go up or down except on the trail." "Oh, you did look so funny," said Benny. "I could hardly help laughing." "Neither could I," said Mr. Alden. "Now we can all laugh all we want." Indeed, when anyone thought of Grandfather pouring grease straight down the mountain, it was hard to stop laughing at all. "Now the hamburger," said Henry. "Just about room for 6 in the pan." Jessie passed him the hamburger cakes. They started at once to give out a delicious smell. Soon Henry gave the orders. "Get a plate and a bun and a piece of cheese and a paper napkin, and be all ready for your hamburger." "We'll get a bottle of Coke too," said Benny. "Right," said Henry. "And I will put Grandfather's black coffee in one of these cups." Never did food taste better. They made it last a long time. "I think this is the first time," said Jessie, "that we have ever had leftover picnic. I couldn't eat all my hamburger, and neither could Violet. We have 5 buns and 1 hamburger left." "You will see that I didn't quite finish my hamburger either," said Grandfather. Benny's loud voice was heard saying, "Save it! Save every crust and every crumb. I have a feeling I might use it later in the day." The Alden family picked up all their papers and cups and burned them in the fire. Grandfather said, "Save my coffee too. I have a feeling I might like it just before we go." We go at exactly 4 o'clock. Violet shook every drop out of an empty Coke bottle. She filled the bottle with coffee. Henry saw what she was doing and said, "Just dump the coffee grounds on the rocks. The wind will blow them away." "When we go down," said Benny, "how about letting me go first?" "All right," Grandfather agreed. "You lead the way." They put the scraps of food in a paper bag, and at exactly 4 o'clock, Benny got ready to go back down. Benny said, "The first step will hold both my feet." "So will the second one," said Henry. Benny reached down carefully with 1 foot for the first step. He held onto the edge tightly. It was a long way down to the next step, and he almost wished he had let Grandfather or Henry go first. "Let me take one of your hands," Henry said. "Take your time, and you'll be all right." Benny swung his other foot down, but still kept Henry's hand. The next step was not quite so steep. With 1 foot on the second step, Benny was just about to let Henry go. Then, with no warning, it happened. In one moment, Benny's foot was on a step. The next, he was reaching wildly for a foothold. With a noise like thunder, the stone step went crashing down the mountainside. As it rolled, it knocked loose stones and boulders in a regular mountain slide. "Help!" Benny shouted, hanging on to Henry and trying to catch anything he could that would not crumble and break loose. Grandfather threw himself down and grabbed Benny by his free arm. Henry got a better grasp. Jessie took the back of his sweater, and the 3 pulled Benny to the top and safety. Benny lay perfectly still on his side, breathing hard. "Gramps," he said, "it will take me 3 days to get over this." Benny had never called his grandfather Gramps before, and nobody had ever seen him quite so still. Mr. Alden knelt down to comfort him. He said, "Benny, you put your mind on this. Forget the step. Just think that your life was saved for something special, and try to wonder what it is." Benny sat up at once. "I was saved, wasn't I?" he cried. "Maybe I'll be a mountain climber or a scientist." Jessie and Violet both looked pale. They knew what a narrow escape Benny had had. The noise of the rocks crashing down, Benny's shout, the rescue, it had all happened so quickly. Henry looked around the rocky top of the mountain. He did not want to frighten the girls, but he knew that the only way down was gone. The rocky sides of Old Flat Top gave no spots to get a foothold. Mr. Alden said, "Now let's plan what we'll do. We are all safe here, but we'll be cold. We certainly can't get down now." Henry said, "Won't the ranger and the man in the store notice when we don't come down?" Mr. Alden gave Henry a look. Then he said, "There are a lot of things that they may do. One thing seems sure. We'll have to spend the night up here. This is the end of the summer, and it will be dark soon." Henry said, "Perhaps they heard the rocks coming down." "Yes," said Violet, "they crashed down like thunder." "They probably did hear the noise," said Mr. Alden. "I don't think we need to worry, but perhaps we better build a fire. They will see it when it gets dark." Henry had a feeling that Mr. Alden knew something that the children did not. But he went right to work, and everyone helped to build a roaring fire. Violet's teeth were chattering. She said, The fire feels good. I didn't know that I was so cold." "That's because you nearly lost me, Violet," said Henry. "Haven't you ever heard of shivering from fright?" It soon began to get quite dark. Still, Grandfather did not seem to be worried. Suddenly, they all heard a strange whirling sound. "It sounds like an aeroplane," said Benny. "I'll bet it's a heliocopter." Henry cried, "That's Grandfather for you. I'll bet he planned this in case of trouble." Grandfather smiled. It was indeed a helicopter. First, it went high over Flat Top, winked its lights, and then hovered over the family. The pilot had a megaphone. He called down, "Are you all right?" The 5 voices shouted, "Yes!" "We can't take you off in the dark," the pilot called. "We'll have to wait until morning. But I am going to drop 5 sleeping bags. Keep your fire going, and we'll be around in the morning. Now all of you stand behind the hump." The whole family did so. Down came 5 sleeping bags, one by one. The helicopter whirled away. Jessie said, "I guess they didn't know we were short on food. It's lucky we saved everything from lunch that we did not eat. I wonder if we should eat the leftovers for supper." "Maybe we should save the food for morning," Violet said. "We might have to wait for quite a while." "Good idea," agreed Grandfather. "As long as we are warm, we can stand being a little hungry." Benny added, "I guess I got the hungry scared right out of me, at least for now." Grandfather said, "You know the old saying about an ill wind that blows no good." "It wasn't a wind, it was a rock slide," Benny said. Mr. Alden said, "We might as well get into these sleeping bags and keep warm." When they were all in the sleeping bags, they sat in a row. Benny said, "We'd look funny if there were anyone to see us." They all looked down over the dark country. Many lights of the town shone at the left,
but not a light at the right. In a little while, Jessie said, "You know, I think I see a faint light in the woods. You don't suppose anyone is in trouble, do you?" "I don't see it," said Mr. Alden. "Oh, yes, I do too. It's very faint, but it stays right in one place." Benny asked, "How could anyone live in the woods? I wonder what the light is." Mr. Alden was glad to have anything interesting to talk about because he knew the night would be long. "When we get down," he said, "we'll have to find out what the light is. The rangers may know, and if they don't, we'll find out anyway." The stars came out. They were very bright. "I don't really mind going to bed tonight," said Benny, "'cause I'm in bed." Jessie whispered to Henry, "He seems to be all right now." "Thanks to Grandfather," whispered Henry. "He certainly said the right thing to Ben." Mr. Alden and Henry decided to take turns putting wood on the fire during the night. There was plenty of wood. They all lay down in a row. Benny was on one side of Grandfather and Violet on the other. Benny sounded sleepy as he said, "I'm coming over closer to you, Grandfather, if you don't mind." "Come ahead, my boy," said Mr. Alden. "You know, Grandfather," said Benny, "I must have been seeing things. When the big rock gave away, I thought I saw an enormous hole behind it." "Maybe you really did see a hole," said Grandfather. "I have heard of holes in the mountains." But by this time, Benny was already asleep. Chapter 3. Waiting for Rescue. When Henry awoke, he thought, even before he opened his eyes, "The helicopter will come at sunrise." Then he opened his eyes and blinked. The whole mountaintop was covered with thick fog. Henry turned his head and looked at Jessie. She was close enough to touch, but he could hardly see her. Benny called, "I'm awake, Henry. Foggy, isn't it?" Henry propped himself up on one elbow. "I wonder if it is often foggy like this in the morning. I guess when we're not up so high, we don't pay any real attention." Grandfather said, "The mountain top is always covered with fog in the early morning. That is why campers don't stay here overnight. But the fog will soon go away." Henry said, "One thing is sure, we must stay close together every minute." Everyone understood what Henry meant. It would be dangerous to move about too much, and perhaps come close to the edge of the rocky, flat top without knowing it. They all sat up. "Where is that paper bag of scraps?" asked Benny. "Now I'm hungry." "I have it," said Jessie. "I also have some napkins. Put your hands out and take a napkin, and I will try to divide up the breakfast." She broke the big hamburger into 5 pieces. Then she got out of her sleeping bag and went down the line, putting scraps of roll and one whole roll on each napkin. She gave Mr. Alden his cold coffee. There were 4 cups on the top of the thermos bottle. "Tell me when you want a drink of water," she said. "We mustn't waste a drop." Violet was on one end of the row, and Henry was on the other. They could not see each other because of the fog, but they could hear very well. Everyone started to eat breakfast. Violet said, "I wouldn't think bread crusts could taste so delicious." Grandfather said with a laugh, "Nor cold coffee mixed with Coke." Benny said, "After this, you'll have to put Coke in your coffee instead of sugar." Henry said, I certainly hope the fog will lift before lunchtime, because we haven't a crumb of food left." Henry had no sooner said that than the fog lifted. Like magic, it entirely disappeared. "That's the way fog does," said Henry. "And don't forget, it can shut down just as fast. Maybe it will come back." "You're the gloomy one," Jessie said, but she laughed. "Well," said Mr. Alden, "I don't think it will this time. Look at the sun." The whole valley was golden in the bright sunshine. There was not a cloud in the sky. "Maybe we ought to get ready for the helicopter," said Violet. "We don't want to keep them waiting." They got their packs ready, rolled up the sleeping bags, and waited. "Remember when that big rock fell?" said Benny. "I think I really saw a hole, a huge one, like a cave maybe." Grandfather said, "You may be sure we'll find out." "Ah, here's the helicopter." "I guess they know the fog has gone away," said Jessie. The Alden saw the helicopter whirling far above and then slowly coming down. Without a word, they all stood behind the hump. This left an open place for the helicopter to land. It came straight down and landed exactly in the middle of the space. "Straight as a string," said Benny. "Oh, look, who's here? It's Mr. Carter." Violet cried, "Now where in the world did he come from?" Grandfather smiled. "Really?" said Jessie. "How did he know about us, Grandfather?" "That will be a good puzzle for you to guess," said Mr. Alden. "Pooh," said Benny. "I bet I can tell you exactly what happened. I'll bet you told the ranger to send for Mr. Carter right away if anything happened." By this time, Mr. Carter and the ranger had let down the steps and were climbing down. "We can't take all of you at once," the ranger pilot said. "Well then, leave me for the second trip," said Mr. Alden. "And I will stay with you, Grandfather," said Violet. "Good girl," Mr. Alden said. Henry, Jessie, and Benny took their packs and poles and sleeping bags. John Carter helped them up the steps into the helicopter. "We'll be back soon," he said, pulling up the steps. Sure enough, in a short time the helicopter was back for Grandfather and Violet. Grandfather asked the pilot to hover over Flat Top. There was the hole that Benny thought he saw when the step fell. "Look, Violet, there's the hole," shouted Grandfather over the noise of the helicopter. Down they went to the log store. Even before the plane landed, Violet said, "Grandfather, I see the rangers and some other men too." "Yes," Grandfather said. "A man with a camera. I have a feeling the newspaper people heard about the rock slide." Flashbulbs popped as Mr. Alden and Violet got out of the helicopter. Benny came running up and cried, "Isn't it exciting? Our reporter asked me all about what happened." "Mr. Alden?" a man with a notebook said, coming up to Grandfather. "Your grandson has told us everything about the accident. The others told me about his rescue and your night on Old Flat Top. May I ask if you plan to stay here any longer?" "The large hole that was opened when the rock slide took place interests me," Mr. Alden said. "We may stay to learn more." Benny was listening hard. "Yes, let's stay," he exclaimed. "And you remember that light we saw?" Before he could say anything more, Mr. Alden told the reporter, "Yes, I think you can say we will be here for a few days. And now we need to get some food. You probably know we had a pretty odd breakfast." "Thank you," the reporter said. "I understand." He closed his notebook and left with the cameraman. "Benny," Mr. Alden said, "I didn't think that the reporter needed to know about everything we saw during the night. not until we know more about it ourselves." The ranger was standing nearby, and Henry turned to him. "I have a question, sir. When it was dark, we all saw a very faint light quite deep in the woods. We thought somebody might be in trouble, but the light didn't move. Do you know anything about this?" "Yes, we do," said one of the rangers. "An old Indian lives there, the last of the tribe. Perfectly harmless. Just wants to live alone and be let alone. Every month I take over some flour, salt, sugar, and tea, and a few canned things. Then I bring back sweet grass baskets in trade. They sell like hotcakes. I haven't one left." Henry asked, "Could I drive the car as far as the house?" "No. You can go a little way into the woods. Then you have to walk about a quarter mile. The path is easy to follow," the ranger answered. Mr. Alden came up. He said, "I think we will drive over. My grandchildren are very much interested." John Carter said, "I have my car. I can take Benny and Violet." Jessie said, "Fine, but we need some lunch. Let's get some food from the store here and then go." Grandfather agreed and let Jessie plan to get what was needed. "We can eat in the woods before we go up the trail," she said. The Aldens were soon on their way, Henry driving in the lead. When they had driven as far as they could into the woods, Henry and Mr. Carter parked the cars. Lunch was quickly eaten because everyone was so curious about the Indian in the woods. Benny called back, "When we get there, do you think it's all right to knock on the door?" "I should think so," said Henry. "What else can we do? We want to go in and meet him, don't we? The ranger said he was perfectly harmless." Soon they saw a small gray house with a large vegetable garden. A stone step was at the front door. Benny knocked. There was a soft sound of feet, and the door opened. There stood a very tall Indian woman who held her head like a queen. For once, Benny did not know what to say. Mr. Alden stepped forward quickly and said, "I hope we are not bothering you. My grandchildren saw your light from old Flat Top. They were afraid you were in trouble." The old Indian woman bowed her head a little, opened the door wide, and said, "Please, come in." Chapter 4. Loveland's Story. The family was so surprised to find an Indian woman instead of a man that no one said anything. The room they looked into had 2 chairs and a couch. On a table lay an Indian basket that was not yet finished. Bunches of sweet grass were hung up to dry. The room was sweet, with the smell of the grass. "Sit down," the Indian woman said. She took the rocking chair, and Mr. Alden sat in the other chair. Mr. Carter sat on the couch, and the others sat on the floor. Still, no one had a word to say. Then Benny, who was nearest the Indian woman, spoke. He said, "That man is my grandfather, James Alden. John Carter is sitting on the couch. I am Benny, and there is my brother Henry and my sister Jessie and Violet." The old woman said, "My name is Loveland Dixon. I am almost 90 years old." "Well," exclaimed Benny. Jessie said, "We were on Flat Top all night and saw your light. We were worried, thinking somebody might be in trouble." "You are very kind," said the woman. "Why were you on Flat Top? Did you have an accident?" "Yes, I did," said Benny. "When I was coming down, the first step broke away. But I don't think about it anymore. Grandfather said there is no use in it." The woman turned to Mr. Alden. He was right, she said. I heard the rocks coming down like thunder. I was worried about you. I saw your fire all night. Violet looked at the old woman and asked, Is anything wrong? Not now, said the woman. Then Benny cried, Do you really live here all alone? Yes, child, said Loveland Dixon. I want to. I do not like living in the town. Too many people laugh at Indian ways. I like to live alone. Violet and Jessie looked around at the house. It was neat and clean. The old woman's gray hair was as smooth as silk. Her strong old face was deeply wrinkled. Benny shouted, Those people were mean. I'd like to tell them so. You're a kind boy. There is no need to bother with anyone. I like it here. I love the woods. I am the last of my people. My tribe has always lived here and the government gave us these woods to my tribe long ago. The woods go to the other side of Flat Top. Now Grandfather spoke. But I have a feeling that something is bothering you. Won't you tell us? The old woman did not speak for a time, and it was very quiet in her little house. Then she said, I hear that the woods will be cut down for lumber. I will lose my land. Nodding, John Carter said, It could be true, Miss Dixon. Many times, I am sorry to say, our government has forgotten its promises to the Indians. Mr. Alden said, From this minute on, do not worry any more. I know a man who will find out who owns this land. He will buy it himself if he has to. You may use it as long as you live, Miss Dixon. Please say Loveland, said the Indian woman with a bow. Loveland, said Benny at once because he liked the sound of the name. When that step gave way on Old Flat Top, I thought I saw a big hole behind it. Do you think that was really true? Loveland folded her arms and sat for a long time with a bowed head. There was not a sound. After a while, she drew a long breath and said, I trust you. Let me tell you a story. Years ago, my grandfather told it to me, and he heard it from his grandfather. You ask about a hole, child. I believe there is a cave. For a minute, Loveland did not say anything more. Then she went on. You understand, this happened years ago. There used to be a cave on the other side of Flat Top, but no cave where you say the hole is. In those days, you couldn't get up the mountain by your trail, but you could get up on the other side. Flat Top didn't have such a flat top at the time. Every eye was on the old Indian woman. They hoped that she would go on, and she did. The story goes that a Frenchman who was a friend of the King of France ran away to America to live. There was a war in France, and he escaped. He was shot accidentally right near here. My great-grandfather, Running Deer, hid him and took care of him until he died. The Frenchman had a great leather bag with things in it which he expected to sell. But when he died, he gave the bag to my great-grandfather for taking care of him. What was in the bag? Cried Benny. Loveland smiled at Benny. I never knew, she said. My great-grandfather died without telling anyone what was in it. But my grandfather thought that his father hid the bag in that old cave. Why didn't he go find it? Asked Benny. Henry said, Benny, you're asking too many questions. Loveland smiled a little. She said, I don't mind. Nobody has ever dared before. Something happened to that mountain and the rocks moved and closed the cave. It looked as if it had been squashed together. That is when Flat Top became flat. Mr. Carter said, "Didn't anyone try to dig out the cave?" "No. The rocks were too heavy. Besides, the climb was too steep." Jessie said, "If that bag was ever found, wouldn't it belong to you?" Loveland bowed again. "Yes," she said. "I am the last of the tribe, and my grandfather told me it was mine." "Wouldn't you expect to get it then?" asked Henry, "if somebody found it?" "I don't know," said Loveland. "I have lost many things." Violet said, "Do you suppose that the hole that Benny found is a sort of back door to the cave?" "I have no doubt of it," said Loveland. Mr. Alden said, "Don't worry any more about anything. I myself will see to it that you get what is yours." Loveland said, "I am grateful to you. All I have left now is this house, and my garden, and my front step." "What about your front step?" asked Mr. Alden. "Come and see," said Loveland. "You must go down my step and watch." She followed them out with a cup of water in her hand. They watched her as she poured the water slowly into some hollows in the step. "A big, enormous claw!" cried Benny. "It's almost as long as the step." "A dinosaur track!" shouted Henry. "I've seen one at college." Grandfather said, "Where did you get this? It is certainly a big piece of red sandstone." "Yes," said Loveland. "It came from the ledge right over there. My grandfather thought it was the track of a big bird. They called it a thunderbird track." Benny laughed. "That's a car," he said. Mr. Carter said, "They named the car for the bird." "I suppose you know," said Jessie, "that a museum would like your step." "But I want my doorstep," said Loveland. "And you shall keep it," said Mr. Alden. "The man who buys your woods would want you to have it. And now I think we should go. Thank you very much for everything." "But we'll be back," said Benny. He gave Loveland a great smile, the kind that only Benny could give. Chapter 5. More Plans. When the Aldens were in the car, Violet said, "We can see right through you, Grandfather. You are the man who's going to buy the woods, aren't you?" "Of course," said Grandfather, smiling at her. "What better thing could I do for Loveland? She will feel free. And don't forget, I will have a fine woodlot. John, you attend to that for me, will you?" Mr. Carter laughed. "I was already planning my first step." Henry said, "I don't see how we can go home and leave this whole thing, Grandfather. What do you think about staying in a motel for a few days?" Mr. Alden said, "All right, that's a good idea. We can ask the ranger where the nearest motel is." Benny said, "3 rooms would be right for us. 1 for the girls, 1 for us boys, and 1 for Grandfather." Turning to Mr. Carter, Mr. Alden said, "It's settled then. We'll stay here. I think you had better drive back to look after business details." Everyone waved at Mr. Carter as he drove off. At the log store, the Aldens found the ranger they knew. "Did you find Loveland Dixon at home?" he asked. "Oh, yes," Jessie said. "What a wonderful old woman she is." "You'll never believe it," said the ranger, "but the Indian woman, 90 years old, has to walk 5 miles to the swamp to get the sweetgrass, and 5 miles back. Quite a walk for 90. We sell the baskets just as fast as we get them." "I'd like a sewing basket like that," Jessie said, "and so would Violet."
"I think Miss Dixon would make you one if you asked her," the ranger said. "But if you do ask, don't try to pay her for them. It will be a gift, you can be sure. She gave one to my wife, so I know. I tried to pay her, and she was very much hurt." Now Grandfather spoke. "Do you happen to know if Dr. Pierce Osgood and his men are working somewhere in the neighborhood? I have an idea. Pierce would be very interested in the cave Benny found by accident." "Yes, we saw the cave from the helicopter. The rocks were huge that fell away to leave it open," one of the rangers said. "Look out the door, and you can see a pile that rolled all the way down the mountain." Indeed, there was a pile of rocks, of all sizes, perhaps 10 feet high. "And I am glad it did not turn into a bigger rock slide," the ranger said. "I know Dr. Osgood would not be too far off. Let me make some calls, and I'll get his telephone number for you." "Good," said Mr. Alden. "Let's find that hotel. Where's the nearest one?" "Go back to the main road, turn to the right, and then go about half a mile. That's the nearest motel, and it's the best one, too." "How lucky we are," said Benny. "Things seem to be just happening just right." The family went out to the station wagon, and Henry started the car. They drove away, waving at the ranger. "We'll be back soon," cried Benny. "Perhaps not until tomorrow," called Grandfather with a wink. "The kids are pretty tired, I guess," shouted the ranger. "I wasn't tired at all until he said that," said Jessie, "and now I guess I am." "I guess I am too," said Grandfather. "The first thing I will do is take a nap." Henry drove just as the ranger had said. He soon came to a motel. It was a long row of log buildings. At one end, there was an office, and at the other end, a restaurant. "Good," said Jessie. "I shall be so glad to have a real dinner. It seems like we've been gone much longer than 2 days." Benny said, "I know just what I'm going to eat, too." Grandfather said, "Don't tell then. Keep it for a surprise." The 3 motel rooms were just alike. Each had 2 beds and a bathroom. Benny said, "Oh, I can hardly wait to wash my hands. It has been 2 days since I've really washed them." "Funny to hear you say that, Ben," said Henry. "I'm going to take a shower first thing I do." It was not long for the Aldens to make themselves at home in their 3 motel rooms. "First thing is a shower for me," said Henry. "I'm next," Benny said. "And after that, I'm going to try out that bed." Violet and Jessie too decided to shower and nap, but it was Grandfather who was the first one asleep. There hadn't been much time for sleep for anyone for 2 nights. An hour or so later, Benny saw that Henry was awake. He said, "Guess what I'm going to have for dinner?" "You can't keep that secret, Ben, can you?" said Henry. "But wait, they may not have it." "I never thought of that," said Benny. "I hope they will, because I got my mind all made up." At 5:30, nobody could wait any longer. They walked down to the restaurant and found a table for 5. "Too bad Mr. Carter's missing this," said Violet. "I'm going to have roast beef and mashed potatoes and peas." "And a fine, hot summer diet, too," said Mr. Alden. "I'll have the same." Jessie and Henry could not think of anything better, but Benny said, "Corned beef and cabbage and lots of chili sauce and turnips and carrots." How wonderful that meal did taste! The waiter was amused.
He watched Benny cut the tender red corned beef as if he were starving. After the first few bites, Jessie said, "Grandfather, what is this first step that Mr. Carter is going to take?" "Try to buy the woodlot is first," said Mr. Alden. "Then you all heard the name of Dr. Pierce Osgood. He is a great man and an explorer. He has written several books on caves and mountains. He is always interested in any new crack or landslide. I used to know him years ago. He can tell right away whether this hole is interesting or not." "I bet it is," cried Benny. "Well, I won't bet against you," said Grandfather, smiling. "I think it is too. Otherwise, I should not have asked the ranger to send for Dr. Pierce Osgood and let him waste his time." "Let's stay in the motel until the whole thing is solved," said Benny. "Don't you agree, Grandfather?" "Well, yes, my boy," said Grandfather, smiling. "I couldn't tear myself away now for anything." Henry said, "The great question is it a cave or is it just a hole?" Jessie said, "Or is it a cave with something interesting in it, or is it a cave with nothing in it?" Benny was drinking milk now. He said, "I'm going to have bread pudding for dessert." "I hope you can hold all that food," said Grandfather, looking at him. "Oh, I can," said Benny. "I have a hollow leg." Henry said suddenly, "Grandfather, did you expect an accident on Flat Top?" "No," said Mr. Alden, "but I never like a place that only has one way to get in and only one way to get out." That night, at about 12 o'clock, a man came to the office and took the room next to Henry and Benny. At 1 o'clock, another man took the last room next to the restaurant. But nobody woke up, and none of the Alden family knew anything about the two men until the next morning at breakfast. Chapter 6. Back Up the Trail. The Alden family did not get up very early the next morning, but when they walked into the dining room, they had a surprise. There sat John Carter at a large round table for 7. "I'm glad you found us," shouted Benny. "I never lost you," said John Carter, getting up. He pulled out chairs for Jessie and Violet, and soon they were all chattering at once. "I thought you might like to see this paper," Mr. Carter said. He unfolded a newspaper and showed a headline that read, "Rescued by Helicopter." "Here we are," Benny said, "and it tells about the rock slide and the hole in Old Flat Top. Everything." "That's right," Mr. Carter said. "How does it feel to read about yourself in the newspaper?" Jessie was looking around at the table. "Who is the 7th place for?" she asked. Mr. Alden and Mr. Carter looked at each other. "Then he got here last night?" Mr. Alden asked. "He is not one to waste any time." "Who got here?" asked Benny. "I'll make a guess," Henry said. "Dr. Osgood?" "Well, if it is Dr. Osgood, and I'm not saying it is, how do you think he'll look?" asked Grandfather. Jessie answered, "Oh, I guess he is a tall, large man. He must be strong to climb up all these high mountains." "Yes, that's right," said Mr. Carter.
He must be a very strong man. Benny said, "If a big, strong, tall man should come in the door, I should say it must be Dr. Pierce Goodwin." Mr. Alden said, "Better order some breakfast and not keep the waiter waiting." Everyone ordered bacon and eggs and toast and orange juice and milk. Grandfather and Mr. Carter had coffee. They were all busily eating when the door opened. They looked up. There stood a small man, not much taller than Benny or Violet. His hair was pure white, and his eyes very sharp and blue. His glasses were pushed up on his forehead. He was surely not young, but he walked quickly over to Grandfather to shake his hands. "Good to see you again," said Grandfather. "You came soon. My grandchildren can hardly wait." "Oh, I feel the same way," said Dr. Osgood, looking at each one in turn. "I would start working without eating any breakfast. Only, I have learned to eat when I can. One doesn't get so tired." He sat down and ordered some breakfast, as the rest did. Benny asked, "Have you made any plans about what you will do first, Dr. Osgood?" "Oh, yes. I made them on the train as I came here. A cave isn't usually so high on a mountain as this one. We have to build a staging first. The staging has to be strong to hold the workmen and the machines. It will take 3 days at least to build that." "3 days?" cried Benny. "You'll find, young man, that 3 days will go by just like that." He snapped his fingers. Making a staging is interesting. If you feel like climbing the mountain again, you can all sit and watch. "Oh yes, we'd like that," said Jessie. "I was afraid we wouldn't see anything." "Well," said Dr. Osgood with a twinkle, "what would be the good of that? The very people who found the cave not watching the workmen? No, sir, not possible." "I'll drive you over after breakfast," said Henry, "whenever you want." "Thank you," said Dr. Osgood. "I accept." As they left the table, Grandfather said, "By the way, Pierce, I have a story about the hole in Old Flat Top that I'd like to tell you. Why don't you stop by my room?" Dr. Osgood's eyebrows shot up, but all he said was, "Do I smell a bit of a mystery? Now, let me see. Is it pirate gold? Or an Indian grave?" "Well, those guesses are good, but I'd rather talk where we are alone. This just might be important to someone." In about half an hour, the Aldens and Dr. Osgood were getting into the station wagon. When they arrived at the log house store, there was quite a crowd of men and women and even children standing around. The ranger said to Dr. Osgood, "2 of your men have already gone up the trail. Do you want me to go first and show you the way?" "Thank you, no," said Dr. Osgood. "I think I can find my way. I'm sure it will be full of rocks brought down by the landslide. You Aldens follow me." The Aldens went up the trail after the spry little man, but they could not see him. Mr. Alden said, "Now it takes 3 hours to get to the top. We'd better not hurry. We're not used to going up like this. I'll go first, then Violet. That will slow you down, I guess." "That's okay," said Benny. But it was not Mr. Alden and Violet who slowed them down. It was the rocks. Many of them had come down in the landslide. As Henry climbed over the rocks, he said, "See how different some of these rocks are? Some are sharp, just broken off the day we came down. But look at those huge ones, perfectly smooth. I'm sure those were left here by the glacier." "Right," said Grandfather. "This is a fine place to study rocks." As they climbed down slowly, Henry turned around and said to Jessie, "Did you notice that the crowd at the store?
"I certainly did," said Jessie. "I suppose they came to see the excitement." Henry asked in a low voice, "Did you see what I saw? An Indian boy." "Yes, I did. He looked like he wasn't very happy. And when I looked at him, he turned around and hid behind another man." There was a pause while they climbed further. Then Jessie said, "I thought the ranger said Loveland was the only Indian around here." "Yes, that's what I thought too," said Henry. Chapter 7. A Stranger. Henry and Jessie did not say any more about the Indian boy, but they did not forget him. Once in a while, they both wondered where he came from and why he was there. They also wondered why he did not want to be seen. There was plenty to think about while they were on their climb. In some places, the path was almost blocked by fallen rocks. They had to climb over them or walk around them. Benny called back, "It's lucky nobody was on this trail when these rocks came down." Grandfather said, "I was just going to say we should be ready to dodge if any more come down." "I think somebody is behind us," said Henry. "We'd better be careful not to send any more down on top of him." "I hope somebody is behind us," said Mr. Alden with a laugh. "Otherwise, we'll have no lunch. John Carter is supposed to bring up enough lunch for us and the workmen and Dr. Osgood." "Well, he'll have a heavy load," said Benny. "That will be enough lunch for 9 people." "Don't worry about John Carter," said Grandfather. "He'll manage." When they were quite near the top, they heard noises. It sounded like chopping and pounding, and that is exactly what it was. The 2 workmen were soon seen chopping down bushes and small trees to the left of the path. There were no trees or bushes near the top. It was all rock. The workmen had cleared a spot that looked like a good place to sit and watch what was going on. There was some lumber, a strong ladder, and a long flat plank. The plank had been placed near the opening to the cave and was held down with rocks. Dr. Osgood was standing on the plank and bending over to look into the dark hole. Benny said, "I guess Dr. Osgood couldn't wait." The explorer held a bright light in his hand. His glasses were pulled down, and he was too busy to notice the Aldens. Grandfather sat down on the dry grass. He said, "I think Dr. Osgood wants to see first what kind of hole it is, just to see whether it will be worth exploring or not." "Oh dear," cried Benny. "I hope it turns out to be worth exploring. Wouldn't it be awful if we had to just give up and go home?" "Well, I don't think we will," said Henry. "Look at him now." Dr. Osgood had both arms and his head in the hole. The Aldens could see only a pair of legs. Just then, Dr. Osgood looked up from the hole and turned half around. He called to the workmen, but the Aldens could not hear what he said. However, the workmen did and called back, "Very good, sir." They were used to working with Dr. Osgood. Then Dr. Osgood started to climb down to talk to Grandfather. He sat down beside him and pushed up his glasses again. "Well, Pierce, what's the good word?" asked Grandfather. "A very good word," said Dr. Osgood, nodding. He wiped his face with a big red handkerchief. "Now you know I never saw Old Flat Top before it was flattened." He smiled at the young people. "But I have good reason to think The first cave was on the back of the mountain. Then something happened like a small earthquake. The back was pushed down and closed up that hole. But this front end to the cave was not squashed. So it is just the same as it had been for many, many years. Benny said, "Then this front hole is really the back of the cave?" "Right," said Dr. Osgood. "You'll be a cave digger someday." "Are you going to blast?" asked Benny. "No, I don't think so. We can drill as far as we need to. The other end is completely closed, they say. However, we'll wait and see." "Hello, here comes my help." "Oh, I thought it was my help," said Grandfather, "with some lunch." "It's both," said Henry, who could see the trail. He looked down. 2 more workmen were dragging a heavy load of lumber. John Carter was behind them with a large knapsack on his back. Henry said, "Dr. Osgood, what did you see when you put your light in the cave?" "Well, I could see about 10 feet with the light," said Dr. Osgood. "The hole grows larger. I should say if we crawled in about 15 feet, we could stand up. It surely has not been touched by human hands for about 200 years. Maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. However, I saw no treasures. You must be willing to explore and find nothing. That's why this job takes patience. Lots of my work goes for nothing, wasted." "I wouldn't like that," said Benny. "No, I can see that you wouldn't," said Dr. Osgood. He got up quickly from the ground and climbed up to the workmen. He began to put blue chalk marks on many of the rocks. When he had gone, Grandfather said quietly, "Did any of you notice an Indian boy in the crowd?" "Yes!" they all cried. Henry said, "We thought Loveland told us she was the last Indian around here. That surprised us." "Maybe she doesn't know about this boy," said Mr. Alden. John Carter sat down with the family. He said, "I did try to talk with the boy, but I had to order the lunch. So I couldn't take enough time, but I will." "Good," said Mr. Alden. "Maybe he doesn't live around here anyway. Maybe he heard of the work on Old Flat Top." "He heard fast then," said Benny. "Well, news travels fast," said Grandfather thoughtfully. "I hope he doesn't bother Loveland," said Violet. "Well, after we get down, we'll see that he doesn't," said Mr. Alden. "Right now, we are trying to find Loveland's treasure." "Wouldn't it be awful if somebody stole it last night?" exclaimed Benny. "Well, it is possible," said John Carter. "They had all night, if they were good climbers and worked quietly." Chapter 8. The First Find. "Couldn't we go up that ladder?" asked Benny, "and take a look in the hole?" "Not yet, young man," said Dr. Osgood. He pushed up his glasses. "We don't want any more accidents. When we get the staging done, it will be safe for any of you to get up and look in the cave." Mr. Alden said, "Pierce, the old Indian woman, Loveland, told us that her great-great-grandfather hid that leather bag in a cave. Now suppose this was the cave. Would that be near this door or near the opening on the other side, do you think?" "I should say he crawled in and hid it as far back as he could," said Dr. Osgood. Benny said, "That would mean the leather bag could be right under our noses. I hope they will get the staging done fast. I can hardly wait. Can you, Mr. Carter?" Mr. Carter said, "No, I can hardly wait either. But right now, I'm hungry. Aren't you all hungry?" Always, said Henry and Jessie together. Well, then let's have a bit of lunch, said John Carter. You've had a 3-hour climb, and we all need food. And you should see the lunch. Oh, we'll never eat all this food, Jessie said as she watched the lunch being unpacked. Don't forget, it is for the workmen too, said Dr. Osgood, and me. Then Henry noticed that Benny was sitting still and saying nothing. What's the matter, Ben? Well, I simply can't decide which sandwiches I like best, said Benny. I just like them all. Well, shut your eyes and point then, said Mr. Carter. Benny did so. He was pointing at the cheeseburgers. That's exactly what I do like best, really, he cried. Cheeseburgers. I thought you didn't know, laughed Violet. Yeah, I thought so too, said Benny. And I just love to dunk hard-boiled eggs. He opened his salt and pepper and dunked his egg in the salt as he spoke. Then he bit off a huge bite. Delicious, he said. Everyone agreed. The piles of sandwiches went down very fast, but there was plenty for the workmen when Mr. Alden called them to lunch. When the workmen sat down, the Alden family waited on them. Henry gave them hot coffee. Violet passed the pickles. Mr. Carter got out the cold drinks. Jessie gave each one an egg and salt. Benny sat down with them and had another sandwich. He said, "You haven't really got very far on the staging, have you?" "No," said the head man. "It takes 3 days. You see, staging must not fall, and it has to rest somewhere. It takes time to make a place to hold it." "Don't you wish that you could take time off and look in the cave?" asked Benny. "Yes," said a man, "but if we do, the staging has to wait, and it takes that much longer to finish it. Dr. Pierce has had a look, and that's enough for me. He thinks it's worthwhile, so I'm not wasting my time." Henry said to Dr. Osgood, "What do you think could be in the lost bag?" "A French nobleman expected to sell whatever was in it for enough money to live here. So it must be worth something." "It could be a jewel," said Dr. Osgood. "French noblemen often had to sell jewels to keep alive. It could be gold coins or silver. It could be silver candlesticks or vases or mirrors or spoons. I don't know." "I know you, Pierce," said Mr. Alden. "You're not really interested in that leather bag, are you?" "Well, no, not much," said Dr. Osgood. "I always hope to find something important in a cave." "What could be more important than Loveland's treasure?" cried Benny. "Well, you're right, my boy, if you are thinking mostly of Loveland. But for the whole country, stones could be more important. They are to me." He threw his head back and tried not to laugh. Grandfather shook his finger at his old friend. "You're up to something, Pierce. Have you found something already?" "Well, I suppose I shall have to show you," said Dr. Osgood. "At first, I thought I'd put it back and let Benny find it. But Benny wouldn't like that much if he found out." "No, I wouldn't," said Benny. "Here it is," said Dr. Osgood. He took out a flat stone out of the biggest pocket in his overalls. It was about 6 inches long. He gave it to Henry, not Benny. "Take care," he said. "A fossil," said Henry. He took the stone carefully in his hands. It was flat on one side, but it was split down the middle. "Take off the cover," said Dr. Osgood. "Careful now." Henry lifted the top half, and they all bent over to look. "A little fish!" cried Benny. "Yes, a fossil fish," said Dr. Osgood. "It is many years old." "What kind of a fish?" asked Benny. He was sure Dr. Osgood knew everything. "I don't know," said Dr. Osgood. "You may be sure that many people will study this fossil. See the backbone? Every little bone shows on both halves. Does that mean that this mountain top was once underwater?" asked Jessie. "Yes," said Dr. Osgood, nodding. "And this is the proof. I'd rather find this than 10 leather bags," Dr. Osgood said. "And you'll be surprised to hear this. I think you had better start down the mountain. The weather doesn't look too fine to me." "It looks beautiful to me," said Benny, looking at the deep blue sky. "But, of course, you would be right. Are you coming too?" "No, I'll stay. I'll keep my head man, and we'll come down later in the helicopter." Jessie did not have to be told twice. She was already packing the things. 3 hours later, they reached the store. They all went in, and Mr. Carter said to the ranger, "Did you see the Indian boy this morning in the crowd?" "Yes, he is new around here. Before I had time to talk to him, he had gone." "Gone?" cried everyone. "Yes, gone. And what's more, he's still gone. Nobody around here ever saw him before. Nobody knows who he was or how he got here." "That's very funny," said Henry. "I should think somebody would have spoken to him. There was such a crowd. Would you guess he was up to no good?" "Well," said the ranger. He stopped. When he went on, "We know nothing about him. He may be lost and need help. That's really why we're going to find him, come what may." Chapter 9. Caught in the Rain. Mr. Alden walked around the store, looking at everything. There were no Indian baskets left. He said, "Let's go see Laverne again." "Don't get caught in the storm," said a ranger. "Storm? It looks pleasant to me," said Benny. "Well, you get to know the weather around these mountains," said the ranger. "I was glad to see you come down so early. Dr. Osgood will be all right. He knows the weather too." What they did not know was that the snow had suddenly begun to cover the top of Old Flat Top. Dr. Osgood and his workmen were just running to get the things packed on the helicopter to take off in a hurry. The Aldens piled into the station wagon and drove down to Levon Dixon's. The sky was still blue with hardly a cloud. It was very warm. They found Levon hoeing in her flower garden next to the house. "I want to get the earth stirred up before it rains," she said to her visitors. Grandfather laughed. "You think it's going to rain too?" he said. "Oh yes," said Levon. "But come in." "What beautiful flowers!" cried Violet. "Every one is such a lovely color." Levon looked at the eager little girl. She said, "Little Violet, you can take these scissors and cut a big bunch of every flower you like. Don't be afraid to pick a lot. They like to be picked. They blossom all the more." Mr. Alden smiled, but he had come on business, so he was glad to go into the house and ask questions. "I wonder if you have ever heard of an Indian boy around here, about high school age?" he asked. "No," Levon shook her head. "I am the only Indian around. All my brothers died, and my only sister died. She had a daughter, but she died also." "Didn't your sister's daughter have any children?" "I did hear she had a son, but that the baby died when she did. They had moved into Maine with the Maine Indians by then." "What was the baby's name?" asked Henry. "I don't know. We had quarreled, and I never did learn the baby's name." Mr. Carter said, "We saw an Indian boy this morning. He looked unhappy and seemed to be afraid. He hid behind the crowd,
and now he has disappeared."
"Oh dear," said Levon.
"We'll find him," said Benny.
"How?"
Levon asked.
"I thought you said he ran away."
"Yes, he did. But he could never get away with Mr. Carter after him, and the Rangers, and Grandfather." Just then, Violet came in with her flowers. They were beautiful. Pink and white roses, old-fashioned sweet pinks, yellow daisies, lavender heliotrope, larkspur, and sweet peas. "Let's go right home and put these in water," said Violet. "I can't let them fade." She made a pretty picture standing in the door with her brown hair, pink cheeks, and the lovely flowers. "Soon," said Grandfather. "Just one more question, and then we'll go. Why did your family leave you?" "I actually left them," said Levon. "I wanted to go to school, and nobody else did. They called me stuck up because I could read and write. I loved school. There were children of all ages. When I was older, I helped the teacher with the little ones. I taught them the good things of Indian life. I taught them to make baskets and beadwork and moccasins. The children were very good at making up designs, even the little ones." "Good," said Grandfather. "Someone must do that, or we'll lose all the beautiful things that nobody can make as well as the Indian." "It's too bad you don't know anything about this strange Indian boy," said Henry. Levon said slowly, "If he is from my family, his grandmother's name would be Suzanne." "Well, that's something to go on," said Henry. "Come on, everyone," said Mr. Alden. "Violet wants to go." "I don't want to go," said Violet, smiling. "I just want to put the flowers in some water." As the Aldens left Levon's cottage, they felt a cool wind. Clouds were beginning to sweep across the sky. The day that had begun so sunny was suddenly very dark. A storm was brewing. Mr. Alden said, "We'll go to the hotel first, and then we'll talk to the Rangers." "I'll stay at the motel," said Violet. "I'll put the flowers in water before supper. There must be some vases someplace." Everyone knew that Violet would be perfectly happy arranging flowers. The rest of the family went back to the store. There was only one man there. He was not a ranger. "Where is everybody?" asked Mr. Alden. "Oh, they've all gone off in their jeeps to find an Indian boy. I'm keeping the store." Grandfather nodded. "They don't waste much time, I see. The rainstorm will soon be here. I only wish we could have gone with them." "Listen," said Jessie. "Dr. Osgood's storm." The rain blew a few spatters in the open door. Then it came down like a sheet of water. It simply poured. "Too bad the Rangers started out," said Benny. "They will get soaking wet." The man said, "They knew it was going to rain. They all wore raincoats. I think they thought of the Indian boy would be easier to find in the rain." "How is that?" asked Benny. The man shrugged. "I don't know. They know more about finding people than I do. They do it all the time." Then, in the pouring rain, Dr. Osgood and his workmen came in the door. "Oh, everything is happening at once," cried Benny. "Here come the jeeps." Dr. Osgood came in at exactly the same time as a ranger jumped down from a jeep. Another ranger jumped out. Then another person jumped down. He had no raincoat and no hat. Water streamed down over his face. He kept his eyes down.
Chapter 10, David Explains. When the Rangers led the Indian boy into the store, Jessie was near the door. Quickly, she put her hand on the boy's shoulder. "Don't be afraid," she said. "We want to help you." The boy did not look up, but he pushed back his wet hair. A ranger said, "The boy belongs in Maine." When he heard about Old Flat Top on a radio program, he begged rides and got here in no time. He's interested in the cave, but so far I don't understand why. They all sat down. The boy was on a wooden chair. His clothes dripped on the floor. The chief ranger took off his raincoat and sat down at a desk. He said to the boy, "This is a very small village, son. We always notice any strangers. We want to know why you came here, what you expect to find, and also why you ran away. You will save a lot of time if you tell the exact truth. If you tell a lie, we will find out. First, what is your name?" The boy waited a minute. "David Walker," he said. "That's not an Indian name," said the ranger. "No, my Indian name is David Walking by Night." "A nice name," whispered Jessie to Henry. "But Loveland's last name is Dixon." The ranger went on. "Why are you interested in Flat Top?" David Walk by Night drew a long breath. He seemed very tired, but he seemed to be telling the truth. "I was born in Maine," he said, "but I don't belong in Maine. My mother came from another tribe down here. She told me stories about Flat Top." "What stories?" shouted Benny. David looked at Benny. He did not smile. He said, "The stories may not be true, but one story is about some treasure that belongs to my tribe. I thought I might get it sometime." The ranger said, "That treasure would belong to your mother's people first, wouldn't it?" "Yes, but they are all dead long ago. I'm the only one left in that tribe. My mother is dead as well." Nobody spoke for a minute. It was not hard to guess that this boy without a family had no one to care for him. The ranger said, "Did you ever go to school, son?" "A little, not much. I went for a few weeks and then I'd go hunting. Then I'd go back to school for a while." "How did you live? Do you have a job?" "Yes," said David. "I had a lot of jobs. I didn't like any of them. I chopped wood and shoveled snow and worked in a garden. I like that the best." "How did you plan to live down here?" asked the ranger. "Do you have any money?" "No. I thought I could carry things up the mountain. I'm a good mountain climber. But everyone kept looking at me, so I was afraid and ran." Mr. Alden spoke for the first time. He said, "Now, David, I'm beginning to make some guesses. If I am right, I think a new life is about to open for you, if you want it. Right now, I know you are tired. We have heard enough for tonight." David looked at Mr. Alden, and no one needed to tell the boy that he had found a friend. He said, "Thank you, sir." Benny said, "I can guess as well as Grandfather. Can't we take David to the motel and get him some food and dry clothes?" "There is an extra bed in my room," Mr. Carter said. "David can sleep there. How about it, David?" The boy nodded, but Grandfather said, "Let's be sure our plan checks with the ranger." Then he said, "Is this plan all right with you, sir? I'll take this boy with me and take good care of him. I'll see to it that no harm comes to him." "Perfectly all right," said the ranger. He had learned that John Carter was an ex-FBI man. The boy has done nothing wrong. "We'd better go right along," said Jessie. "David needs something to eat." Mr. Carter said, "I'll take Dave and Benny and Jessie in my car." Henry, you take Mr. Alden and Dr. Osgood." The 2 cars soon arrived at the motel. Benny had been chattering most of the way. Jessie and Mr. Carter had talked pleasantly, but the Indian boy had not said a word. Henry said, "The first thing we'll do is find dry clothes for you while you're taking a shower." Henry went at once to his clothes drawer. He got out dry clothes for David. They were all way too big, but they had to do. Benny's shoes were just right for him. When everyone was washed and dressed, they met in the dining room. "Here's a good-looking boy," thought Violet when she met him. "Let's all have hot soup," said Mr. Alden. "I'm just as tired as David is." John Carter thought to himself, "That boy has not eaten anything for a good many hours. I hope he does not faint." David looked first to see how Henry ate his soup, and then he did the same. "He cares," thought John Carter. "He wants to do things right." He had a question to ask, but he waited until the soup was gone, and a tiny bit of color came back to the boy's face. Then he said, "You know, David, we hear there is a big leather bag in some cave with treasures in it. It belonged to an Indian who died long ago. Have you heard this story?" "Yes, sir," said David eagerly. "I heard more than that. I heard that a foreign man had it first. He gave it to an Indian who was afraid somebody would follow him. So he got a bundle of corn and hid the bag under the corn." All this time, Dr. Osgood had been eating soup and smiling to himself. He waited until the roast chicken came. Then he cleared his throat and said, "Ahem," just to be sure that everyone was looking at him. "I just want to say," he began, "that all of this is very important and interesting, but nobody has said a single word about old Flat Top." "Tell us!" they all shouted. "Well, the staging is all done," said Dr. Osgood, "and I crawled inside for 25 feet. "Any bag?" yelled Benny. "Well, no," said Dr. Osgood, smiling. "There are some things right on the floor of the cave that are very interesting to me. The walls seem to be just big, smooth rocks." Benny said, "Oh, Dr. Osgood, there must be some place where something could be hidden." "You'll have to see for yourself," Dr. Osgood said. "Maybe your sharp young eyes will see something my old ones have missed." Chapter 11. Benny Finds the Way. Dr. Osgood promised the family that they could explore the cave in the morning. They went to bed feeling very much excited. Mr. Carter and David talked for a while before they went to sleep. "David, what's on your mind? What are you afraid of?" Mr. Carter asked. There was a long silence. At last, David said, "I climbed Flat Top the night before you did. I heard about the rock slide and the hole on a news program, so I came down from Maine fast. I thought I was the last Indian to know about the treasure, and it could be mine. I was going to take it, and no fuss." "Now supposing this treasure was yours, and somebody else found it, didn't you think they would give it to you?" "No, I didn't think they would." "Well, I don't really blame you," said Mr. Carter. "Were you afraid of the Rangers after you climbed Flat Top? Did you think they knew your secret?" "I wasn't sure, but I thought they wouldn't believe anything I said. I didn't make a sound either. I can walk through the woods and up the mountain without making a noise, but I thought they found out somehow. They looked at me so funny that I hid in the woods." "Nothing to eat?" "No, I didn't dare take anything with me. I thought later I could find out about the treasure, but the Rangers found me first."
"Is that all?" asked John Carter.
"Yes, sir," said David.
"You couldn't get up to the cave? You didn't even look in?"
"No, I couldn't. There wasn't any way to get close. I just saw the hole, and then I had to come down." "Dave, I want you to understand, the Aldens are your friends," said John Carter. "They are fine people. They want to help you. You must not let them down."
"No," said David.
"I like them. They wouldn't cheat me, I know." Everyone was up early the next morning. They ate breakfast and then drove to the foot of Flat Top. Soon, everyone was climbing up the old trail again. Benny came right after Dr. Osgood. The doctor did not climb so fast today. All of a sudden, he looked around at Benny. "Young man, don't get your hopes up on that treasure. I didn't see a single place where it might be. We are going to go further still today, but I don't think I've missed it."
"Oh," said Benny.
"Loveland will be disappointed. I was so sure it was right here. That's where I would have put it, just as far back as I could, and that would be the front now." "Well, you're not an Indian, son, and this isn't 200 years ago. Maybe the man had other ideas."
"Well, I hope not," said Benny. "Well, just for Loveland's sake."
David was right behind Benny. "Did you say Loveland?" he said. "I have heard that name, but she is dead."
"Our Loveland isn't dead," said Benny.
"She is 90 years old, though, and she is the one who told us about the treasure." "My grandmother told me everyone was dead but me," said David.
Benny said, "Do you know your grandmother's first name?"
"Yes, it was Susan." Henry was right behind David, and he heard the name. He said, "Loveland had a sister, Susan. It looks to me as if you are Loveland Dixon's grandnephew. And that would be great, because you could help her. She is getting old now, and she lives all alone." "What is she like?" asked David. "She's swell," said Benny. The family climbed and climbed. It was almost noon when they had reached the staging. The workmen were there. They had put a strong light inside the cave for Dr. Osgood. They were just finishing the wiring. "I'll go first," said Dr. Osgood, "and you can all follow me. First, you have to crawl in, but soon you can stand up. You'll see." The cave was bigger than the Aldens had expected. There was plenty of room for everyone. Dr. Osgood began at once to chip out another fossil. This time it was a fern. An important find. The fern told him how old the cave was. Benny watched him for a few minutes. Then he went back and crawled to the door of the cave. David went too. "Let's see if these stones can possibly be moved," said Benny. He looked at one side of the opening. The big rocks came out and made a large square. "That looks like a chimney," said David. "So it does," cried Benny. "It looks like a closet in a corner of a room." He stuck his head out of the cave and called to a workman, "Hey, please come and look. Do you think anything could be hidden there?" The man laughed. He said, "Well, we can find out." He got a small crowbar and a hammer and went to work. Soon he said, "You're right, Sonny. These rocks don't belong here. They were moved here." Benny didn't like to be called Sonny, but this was no time to say so. Henry came over to watch. Then he called the girls and Mr. Alden and Mr. Carter. The workman said, "When this stone falls, there will be a loud crash and a cloud of dust. Better cover your eyes." They all did so, and the man was right. There was such a crash, and so much dust that nobody could hear or see anything that really happened. When the dust cleared, they all looked in the chimney thing, and there it was. It was a large, black, leather bag lying on the ground behind the stone. Everyone shouted. "Don't touch it," said the workman. "I'll get Dr. Osgood." The doctor could hardly believe what he saw. "I did miss it after all," he said. "And now let's see what's in the bag." Everyone watched as Dr. Osgood worked carefully and slowly. Even so, the leather cracked under his gentle fingers. At last, he got it open and pulled out an enormous teapot, as black as coal. "Solid silver," he said quietly. "Silver?" cried Benny. "It looks more like iron." "Oh, it's silver just the same," said the doctor. "Wait until it is polished, and you will see. A real French piece that belonged to royalty." Then he drew out a candlestick with 6 branches. It too was black. A large black pitcher came next, all covered with the same deep, fancy pattern that decorated the other pieces. Then Dr. Osgood pulled out a black box. A little black key hung on a black chain. Dr. Osgood turned the key very gently. Inside was a necklace of gold set with red and green stones. "That's a queen's necklace," said Dr. Osgood. "That thing alone is a great treasure." Under the necklace was a gold coin of France. There was only one more thing in the bag. It was a roll of heavy paper. "I may not be able to open this," said Dr. Osgood. "I shall stop if it begins to tear." But he was so slow and gentle that the paper did not tear. He took one look. "It's in French," he said. "Of course it would be." Both Henry and Jessie could read French. The old faded message was short. "This is for my Indian friend, Running Deer, who saved my life. Louis Paul Deville." "That settles it," said Benny. "This belongs to Loveland. And now, who will tell Loveland?" Nobody spoke for a minute. They all looked at each other. Then Grandfather said with a smile, "David, walking by night, will tell Loveland." Chapter 12. The Treasure. David looked puzzled when Mr. Alden chose him to tell Loveland. "Mr. Alden, why me?" he asked. Mr. Alden answered, "You know all about it, David, and you remember your grandmother. That will please Loveland. She is a fine person to have as a great aunt." Then they heard the helicopter coming. "Lunch!" cried Benny. Henry looked at his watch. "Did you know it was 2:00? How did you ever stand it, Ben?" "I was so interested in that chimney thing," said Benny, "and the leather bag, I never thought about lunch." "Now you know how I feel," said Dr. Osgood. "I forget all about eating." Mr. Carter said, "Jessie, give me one of those sandwiches. I will go right back to the helicopter. I have some telephoning to do." They all wondered what he was about, but nobody asked a question. They just said goodbye, and back he went to the helicopter, down the mountain. Mr. Carter carefully held the leather bag. Mr. Alden had given it to him. After lunch, Dr. Osgood and his head man stayed on Flat Top. But the rest began to climb down. They were eager to tell Loveland about what had happened. "But let's not tell her all the news too suddenly," said Jessie. "It might be too much for her all at once." "Yes," agreed Henry. "Maybe it would be good if she met David first and then heard about the treasure." Violet said, "I think that this is a good plan. Loveland can make up her mind about David, and then he can tell her about the treasure." When they reached Loveland's cottage, they found her sitting on the dinosaur step with a rough, flat stone beside her. She was rubbing something on it. Loveland had 5 white beads on a string. She had the string over her hand and was rubbing the white beads on the rough rock. The white pieces got rounder and rounder. "You're making beads!" cried Benny. "Yes, I have almost finished," said Loveland. "This is the last string." They saw 2 boxes of round beads, one of white and one of purple. Loveland went on. She saw that they wanted to know. "I break a clamshell in small pieces," she said. "I make a small hole in every piece and string a few beads on the string. Then I grate them until they are round." "I never knew that," said Mr. Alden. "I always wondered how wampum was made." "This is how it's done," said Loveland. "Nobody uses wampum now, but I sometimes weave it into my baskets." All this time David had been watching Loveland, but Loveland was too busy and she did not see David at all. Even Mr. Alden was getting a bit nervous now. He didn't quite know how Loveland would feel about meeting her nephew, but Loveland herself settled that. She suddenly looked up at Mr. Alden and saw David behind him. "An Indian boy," she said. "Who are you, little brother?" David said, "Well, I suppose I am your grandnephew, and you are my great-aunt Loveland." Loveland did not speak. She was thinking. She was looking David over. At last she said, "Then that baby did not die." "I guess not," said David, smiling a little. "I feel alive. My grandmother was named Susan. My mother died first, then grandmother. I thought I was the last of my family." Loveland nodded. She looked at David sharply. "A good young man you are." David bowed his head. "I'm going to be. I can help you with your garden. Maybe I can go to school." Jessie and Henry were watching Loveland closely. They knew by the look on her face that Loveland was really very tired. Tired of living alone. Tired of walking so far to get sweet grass. And tired of wondering what would become of her. Mr. Alden fixed it up as well as he could. He said, "Loveland, you don't know David, and he doesn't know you, but you can get to know each other. David can do work for the Rangers at first, and come and see you often. Then, if you are getting along well, he can live here and take care of you. He's a strong young man." Loveland put the beads in the box with the rest. "Come in," she said. "I will show you where David could sleep if he came here." They all went into the cottage, and Loveland opened a door. David looked at the smooth bed. He looked at Loveland's kind face. For the first time in a long, long time, David felt that he had a home and someone to care about. Before David could say anything, there was a whistle. It came loud and clear into the cottage. "It's Mr. Carter," said Jessie. "He always whistles that tune when he feels fine." John Carter had a large box. He said, "I thought that Loveland would want to see her treasure." "Oh, did you find the leather bag?" cried Loveland. "Yes, we did," said Benny. "We all came to tell you, but we wanted you to meet David first. Now, don't be disappointed when you see the things. They all look black, but they're really silver. They have to be polished." "Of course," said Loveland. "The silver would turn black after all those years." She looked at each piece, but the thing she seemed to like the best was the paper with the French writing. Jessie told her what each French word meant. "Poor man," said Loveland. "He was shot by an Indian. When great-grandfather found him on the side of the mountain, he took care of him. He gave him all the good Indian medicines, but the poor man was badly hurt and knew it. He did not live long. I never heard where they buried him." "It was a secret, like the bag," said Benny. Mr. Alden packed the things in the box again. He gave the roll of paper to Loveland. He said, "Now if you agree, I'll sell these things to a museum or a collector and put the money in the bank. Nobody can get it out except you." "And you too, Mr. Alden," said Loveland. "I'd feel better if you could get it out too. Something might happen to me." "Very well, I'll fix it that way. And now you are tired. We'll all go back to the motel. Come on, everybody." Benny said, "It looks like we've just about solved another mystery." They all went out of the cottage and down the step. All but David. He stood on the step beside Loveland with his head down. He said to Loveland, "Do you mind if I bring my dog here? He's a good dog, and he minds me." "No," said Loveland, shaking her head. "I need a watchdog." The two Indians looked at each other, one so old and one so young. Loveland said a few words in an Indian language. David answered her in the same language. They looked at each other and smiled. Then they shook hands. David turned to Mr. Alden. "I'll come down later, sir. I'd like to stay here with Aunt Loveland for a little while, if you don't mind." "No," said Mr. Alden, walking down to the station wagon. "I don't mind at all. It's exactly what I want most." Chapter 13. No Goodbyes. When the family met at supper, David was not there. "Don't worry about him," Mr. Alden said, sitting down at the table. "He's got 2 good legs, and he can walk miles. He'll show up when he gets ready." Mr. Carter was not there either, but nobody asked where he was. They were used to his going and coming. But Dr. Osgood was there. He said, "I shall be working here most of the summer. You know, my head man is a fine young scientist. He is having the time of his life. He knows those fossils even better than I do." Benny had looked thoughtfully. Suddenly he said, "Why don't we go home, Grandfather?" Everybody stopped eating and stared at Benny. He was usually the last person to want to go home. "Well, why not?" Benny said. "I'd like to see Watch again. We've been away quite a few days." "Well, that's an idea," said Grandfather. "Our real work here is ended. I shall keep track of David anyway, and Loveland too. We can get here any time in 2 hours." Jessie said, "David will be a different boy, Grandfather. I think his Indian friends didn't treat him well. He was not part of their tribe. If he's treated right, he'll act right." Just as she spoke, a figure appeared in the door. It was David, and he was indeed a changed boy. The whole family stared at him and listened. "Oh, Mr. Alden?" he cried. This didn't sound like David at all. "My aunt and I are going to do just fine together. She needs me, and I sure need a family." He put out both hands to shake hands. "Aunt Loveland talks like a steady stream now." "So do you, Dave," said Benny, laughing. "What are you going to do first?" "Well, I'm going to get my dog." "What kind of a dog is she?" asked Jessie. "Oh, he's a hound dog. He came to me. He didn't have a home either. He's white with black and sort of yellow. He has long, soft ears. His tail wags so fast you can't even see it." Everyone was thinking the same thing. David loves his dog. "What's his name?" asked Violet. David stopped short. Then he said, "I hate to tell you, I always called her mine. He was the only thing I had." "That's okay," said Benny. "When you call him, you can say, 'Miney, Miney, Miney.'" "I never have to call him," said David, shaking his head. "He's always with me." Grandfather said, "Sit down, my boy, and eat your supper. Don't you want to ride to Maine?" "No, I'll do the same as I came here. It won't take me long." "We are going home too, Dave," said Henry. "We want to get that silver cleaned and sold. And Grandfather wants to buy your aunt's woodland on both sides of Flat Top. He wants to own it, and once he does, Loveland can be sure the trees will not be cut. Mr. Carter knows collectors who will buy the old silver." "And that necklace," said Jessie. "Loveland doesn't need to worry about money again." "She's going to pay me by the week," said David. "And I'll buy some heavy clothes if I work outdoors, and some clothes for school, too." "David," said Grandfather, "I won't worry about you another minute. You are a man for sure. And that's what your Aunt Loveland needs, a strong young man. I know you must be disappointed that the treasure isn't yours, but never mind that, Mr. Alden," said David, putting out his hand. "I don't want to hear it. Just wait till I get my dog, then it will be all set." "We'll go to see your aunt later today and say goodbye," said Grandfather. "And now we will say goodbye to you for a while." David pushed back his chair. His supper was finished. He looked at them all, one by one. He said, "But I don't know. I don't know." Violet had tears in her eyes. "Don't say anything, Dave," she said. "Just don't say anything." Benny said, "I can't say goodbye to Dave either." "I know what you mean," Jessie said. "Dave is a good friend, and it seems as if we have known him for a long time." The next day was spent getting ready to leave. Mr. Alden wanted to talk to Dr. Osgood. He also wanted to see the Rangers about Loveland Dixon and David. Late in the afternoon, the family drove over to see Loveland. They found her sitting on her dinosaur step, finishing a basket. Somehow Loveland seemed different to them. There was a new happiness in her face. "I have been looking for you," she said. "You have?" asked Benny. "Yes, the ranger told me," said Loveland. "He came over with my canned stuff. I have to get powdered milk for David. When you see him again, you won't know him. I'm a good cook." "He looks better already," said Grandfather. "David stands straight now and looks you right in the eye." While Mr. Alden was telling Loveland about her woodlands and the treasure, the girls watched her fingers with the basket. They saw that she had put white beads all around the top of the basket. Now she was winding a border of sweetgrass for the edge. She came to the last stitch and fastened the grass very tightly. She held it up a minute and then started to get up. "Come in," she said. She walked across the room and took another basket from the table. It was just like the other basket, but the beads were light purple. She turned around and gave the white basket to Jessie and the purple one to Violet. "A sewing basket for you," she said, "made with love." The girls were so pleased that they could hardly speak. "We need these so much," said Jessie. She smelled the sweetgrass. "We'll always think of you when we use these," said Violet. "It is the nicest present you could have given us." "Thank you, Loveland," said Grandfather. "Those are very thoughtful presents, and they are all your handiwork." "Do sit down," said Loveland. She knew the young people would sit on the floor at her side. "One more thing," said Grandfather. "If you are going to feed David and pay him by the week, you'll need money before I can buy this land. Now this is my business. I want David to be educated, and here is some money to start on. A ranger will come to bring you money. You make out a check, and he will cash it. You'll be surprised at how much the boy can eat." "And the dog, too," said Loveland, smiling. She took the money. "I will take care of David like a son. I can teach him many things myself, and there is a school not far away." "Well," said Mr. Alden, getting up, "we must go. We'll just say goodbye for now." "No, no," cried Loveland. "Don't say goodbye. Say, come again." "That's the way I talk," said Benny. "We'll say come again soon, so why say goodbye?" Chapter 14. Time for Celebration. The Aldens had been gone only one day when David came back from Maine with his dog. It was night when David came back, but he was sure of where he was going and his way through the woods. He and his dog made almost no noise, but David found Levon at the door of the cottage, waiting and listening. The old Indian woman was smiling. She liked the way the dog trotted at David's side. "This is mine, Aunt Levon," David said. "Let him sniff you, then speak to him. He won't bite." But Levon knew what to do better than David. She opened the door wide so the dog could smell the cooking. It was a delicious pot roast, cooking with turnips and carrots and onions and potatoes. The dog trotted happily into the cottage. He turned to Levon and sat up with his two front paws hanging down. "He's smiling!" cried David. "Doesn't that look like a smile?" "Good dog," said Levon, shaking hands. Now mine had never learned to shake hands, but when the old lady took his paw in her hand, he wagged his tail as best he could while sitting on it. He seemed to know that Levon was the one with the supper. "Your supper is hot too, Miney," she said. "It's just right for you, David. Sit right down. Are you about starved?" "Very near," said David. "I didn't want to stop to eat, but now it must be the middle of the night." "It's actually 1 o'clock," said Levon. She began to cut many thin pieces of meat. Then she piled a soup plate with vegetables. She put corn muffins on another plate and poured a large glass of milk. Mine sat still, watching for every move. David said, "We ought not give Miney good meat like this. He eats scraps." "Well, some other time, David," said Levon. "Tonight is a party." "Miney is glad," said David. "I'll cut some of my meat for him. It's cool enough now. He likes everything. Bread and vegetables and candy." Mine wagged his tail all the time he was eating. He licked up the last bit and went over to Levon and put both paws on her lap. "Good dog," she said, patting his head. "You are mine too." "I'm glad you like him," said David. "Did you have any troubles with the other Indians?" asked Levon. "No, they didn't want my dog. They have 2 or 3 others. I didn't even tell them where I was going. They didn't ask." "I see," said Levon. "And now let's all go to bed." Things went along well, and a month or so later, the Aldens came back. As they drove into the woods, they heard a dog barking. "That's Miney," said Benny, laughing. Just then, David and Levon appeared around the corner of the house. The dog barked. "Quiet," David said. He stopped. The Aldens could hardly believe what they saw. "You must have gained 10 pounds, Dave," shouted Benny. "I guess so," said Dave, laughing. He was delighted to see his good friends. "What are you working on behind the house?" asked Henry. "Come and see," said Levon with a smile. "We are both outdoor people, so Dave made this place to eat. Under the great pine trees was a large wooden table. On each side was a bench." "The benches are long so we can have company," said David. "Company like us!" shouted Benny. "Let me show you what else we are doing, Mr. Alden," said David. "Aunt Levon and I are making an Indian book." "Well, let me see it. That's the best thing I've heard," Mr. Alden said. "We don't want to lose any of the best parts of the Indian life." By this time, the Aldens were in the house looking at the Indian book pages. "It isn't half done yet," said David. "We are writing down the old stories in the Indian language, and we have drawn Indian pictures to go with them. We are trying to make them look like the ones Indians used to draw. Then Aunt Levon is telling me how to make designs. Here are a few designs for baskets, and here's one for a blanket. We both remember songs, but I have to learn how to write them down." Just then, Mr. Carter poked his head in the door. He said to Levon, "If you are worrying about feeding this crowd, we brought dinner for everyone." "Oh, thank you for telling me," said Levon. "I really haven't enough food for everyone, but we can cook whatever you have. Look over there. See what David built?" It was an outdoor fireplace made of stones. "Just in time," yelled Benny, "because we've got real steak today. We're celebrating." When they all sat down at last, mine went under the table and lay down at Henry's feet. Benny looked under the table. He said, "I do wish you'd choose my feet, Miney, but I suppose Henry makes you think of David. He's about the same size." Everyone was talking. Violet was talking to David. Benny was talking to Levon. Jessie was talking to Mr. Carter. Henry looked at Grandfather. "What a noise," he said. "But a good noise," said Grandfather. "Listen, and you'll hear all the news." Levon was telling Benny that David had bought her a warm blanket with her new money. David was telling Violet that Levon had made colors to paint with from the things in the woods. Mr. Carter told Jessie that David was going to school in the fall. "David is going to be even busier," said Grandfather. "Dr. Osgood tells me that he has tried him out on the mountain, and he's going to hire him as a helper in the summer." "I didn't know things were such interesting things in the world," said David. So here was Walking by Night with a real job, and a new aunt, and a family to help him, and a good hound dog. What more could he want? When the Aldens packed up to go, Benny said, "No, we won't say it. We'll say, 'We'll come and see you soon.'" So that was it. Come again. No goodbyes. On the way home, Benny said, "Oh, by the way, what will we do next summer, Grandfather?" "Don't you wish you knew?" teased Grandfather. "You mean you know?" "I didn't say so, did I?" "No, but your face looked so." "Oh my," said Grandfather. "I must be more careful about my face." Benny teased for quite a while. Then he stopped, for he knew that Grandfather would not tell them anything until he got ready. "Well, it's okay with me," he said at last. "Anyways, whatever we do, I'm sure it will be another story, huh, Gramps?"